Autumn 1941. The German war machine stands at the gates of Moscow. After months of relentless advance across the vast plains of the Soviet Union, the Wehrmacht prepares for what it believes will be the final, decisive blow of the Eastern Campaign. Operation Typhoon is unleashed, a massive offensive designed to encircle, crush, and capture the Soviet capital before winter arrives. But what unfolds outside Moscow will become one of the most brutal and consequential battles of the Second World War, a clash that will determine not only the fate of a city, but the future of the entire war on the Eastern Front. According to the original Barbarossa blueprint, Moscow was supposed to fall within the first 3 to 4 months of the campaign. To accomplish this, the German High Command organized a large-scale offensive known as Operation Typhoon. A central role in this assault was assigned to the 2nd Panzer Army under Heinz Guderian, which had become available after Soviet forces were crushed near Kiev. The revised strategy now envisioned 3 major thrusts instead of the initially planned 2. German forces were directed toward Bryansk, Vyazma, and Orel, with the broader intention of pushing onward toward Tula. The primary objective of the operation was to annihilate the principal Red Army formations defending Moscow before the harsh Russian winter could set in. To carry this out, the Germans intended to fracture Soviet defenses through 3 powerful armored strikes, encircle and eliminate Soviet armies west of Vyazma and east of Bryansk, and then employ fast-moving formations to outflank Moscow from both the north and the south. Working in coordination with forces advancing head-on, the ultimate aim was the capture of the Soviet capital. German commanders believed they had strong grounds to expect the long-awaited decisive victory. In total, 64 divisions were allocated to the Moscow offensive, including 16 panzer divisions and 6 motorized divisions, amounting to roughly 1.8 million soldiers. The Red Army confronted this massive assault with approximately 14,000 guns and mortars, 1,320 aircraft, and around 2,000 tanks. Opposing the German force were 83 divisions from the Western, Bryansk, and reserve fronts, together fielding about 1.25 million men. However, these Soviet formations possessed only around 1,000 operational tanks and 71 artillery regiments, supported by 9 cavalry divisions and limited reserves. The numerical advantage clearly lay with the Germans. The climactic and decisive engagement of the entire Eastern Campaign was expected to unfold near Moscow. Yet the determined Soviet resistance at Smolensk and the slow progress on the German flanks forced the High Command to temporarily suspend the drive on Moscow. German planners had underestimated the depth and persistence of Soviet resistance. Around Smolensk, surrounded Soviet units continued to fight stubbornly, tying down as many as 20 Wehrmacht divisions. As was common in many defensive operations in 1941, the Red Army's principal challenge was uncertainty regarding German intentions. It seemed logical that the Germans would advance along the Smolensk Highway, a route well suited for large motorized columns. Instead, during preparations for the Battle of Moscow, the German command opted for surprise, secretly transferring General Colonel Erich Hoepner's 4th Panzer Group from the Leningrad front. For the first time ever, 3 armored groups operated simultaneously along the same front. Soviet forces defending Moscow were reorganized into 3 fronts: the Western Front under General Colonel Ivan Konyev, the Bryansk Front under General Colonel Andrei Yeremenko, and the Reserve Front commanded by Marshal Semyon Budyonny. Operation Typhoon began in the early hours of September 30th, 1941. Guderian's and Hoepner's panzer groups launched their attacks near Bryansk. Rather than conducting costly frontal assaults, German forces used maneuver warfare, bypassing strongpoints and penetrating deep into Soviet rear areas. Within 3 days, they achieved the complete encirclement of the main forces of Yeremenko's Bryansk front. Orel fell on October 3rd. In response to the crisis, the Soviet High Command authorized encircled units to attempt independent breakouts while concentrating all available reserves along the Moz-Hayas defensive line. Between October 12th and 16th, some divisions successfully escaped the pocket, although subsequent attempts resulted mainly in fragmented groups of survivors breaking through. Many trap formations resorted to partisan-style warfare, with some not rejoining regular Red Army units until the winter of 1941 to 1942. Exploiting the breach in Soviet lines, German armored units pressed forward toward Tula. Guderian's deep thrust compelled the Red Army leadership to implement urgent countermeasures. An airborne detachment was swiftly dispatched to Orel, where paratroopers seized the Orel-Msensk highway and engaged advancing German spearheads. Reinforcements soon followed, including T-34 tanks under Colonel Mikhail Katakov. Near Mtsensk, Katakov executed a carefully planned ambush, allowing Guderian's vanguard to advance before striking suddenly from the flanks and rear. Katakov's forces employed mobile anti-tank tactics, shifting artillery positions after firing several rounds to create the illusion of strong defensive depth. According to Soviet sources, the 4th Tank Brigade destroyed 133 German armored vehicles in the fighting near Mtsensk. The time gained by this action proved critical in strengthening Tula's defenses. When Guderian later attacked the city, the assault ultimately failed. Meanwhile, the broader German offensive resumed. Army Group Center's armored groups and field armies attacked the reserve and western fronts near Rozlovo and Dukovshchina. German armored spearheads broke through Soviet lines and drove toward one another. Within 2 days, the encirclement was sealed. 5 Soviet armies were trapped near Vyazma. In total, roughly 2/3 of Soviet forces deployed in the western direction were encircled near Bryansk and Vyazma. After shattering 3 Soviet fronts, German troops advanced toward Kalinin on October 10th, capturing it by the 17th. Mozhaysk and Maloroslavets were abandoned shortly thereafter. Recognizing the gravity of the situation, Stalin summoned General Georgy Zhukov from besieged Leningrad. Upon arriving and assessing conditions, Zhukov concluded that the Western defensive front had effectively collapsed. The approaches to Moscow lay dangerously exposed. After the war, Zhukov would reflect, "When I am asked what stands out most from the war, I always answer, the Battle of Moscow." There, the fate of Russia was decided. The final defensive barrier before the capital was the Mozhaysk Line, under construction roughly 120 kilometers from Moscow. Zhukov committed every combat-ready unit available in the capital to defend these positions. He ordered the rapid construction of 3 defensive belts, complete with anti-tank ditches, hedgehogs, dug-in tanks serving as fixed firing points, and extensive minefields. Under Order No. 0345, issued on October 13th, strict discipline was enforced. Soldiers who abandoned positions, retreated without authorization, or discarded weapons were to be executed on the spot. Assault groups formed from the remaining T-34 tanks and cavalry units were dispatched to the most threatened sectors, holding off German forces for 2 to 3 days until reinforcements arrived. Crucially, Zhukov insisted on transferring 30 fresh divisions from the Far East after intelligence confirmed Japan's neutrality. By mid-October, Army Group Center's intelligence already anticipated victory. Yet German motorized units that had broken through encountered fierce resistance along the Mozhaysk Line. On the historic Borodino field, site of the 1812 clash with Napoleon, intense fighting erupted once more in October 1941. Soviet soldiers defended the same elevations once held by Russian forces a century earlier. The 32nd Rifle Division under Colonel Polosukhin, recently arrived from the Far East, confronted the elite SS motorized division Das Reich under SS General Paul Hauser. The battles along the Mozhaysk Line lasted several days and were marked by heavy casualties on both sides. Even German accounts acknowledge the ferocity of the Siberian troops, who fought tenaciously and refused to yield ground without bitter resistance. General Hauser himself lost an eye during the fighting. Near Maloroslavets, at the Ilyinsky defensive position, Podolsk military cadets mounted a desperate defense. Armed mainly with carbines and machine guns and lacking proper logistical support, they delayed the German advance for nearly 2 weeks. Despite relentless assaults, the Germans advanced only about 300 meters. When direct attacks failed, German tanks attempted to outflank the cadets, only to be met by devastating fire from 85mm anti-aircraft guns hastily redeployed from Moscow's air defenses to serve in a direct-fire anti-tank role. By mid-October, the Red Army had stabilized the front, albeit precariously. German reports admitted that the battles for Soviet positions were among the fiercest of the entire Russian campaign. Meanwhile, the newly formed Kalinin Front under Konev halted the German Ninth Army's advance. Konev employed deception tactics, staging nighttime engine noise and false radio traffic to simulate offensive preparations, thereby forcing German units to remain on alert. Significant German forces were tied down in battles with encircled Soviet armies near Vyazma and Bryansk during the critical days of mid-October. As they fought these engagements, German units lost precious time and became bogged down in muddy roads rendered nearly impassable by autumn rains. Field Marshal von Bock-Later expressed frustration as Army Group Center's forces became mired in mud and swamps. Subsequent explanations for the October failure often blamed weather alone, yet it was clear that mud affected both sides. By early November 1941, the front near Moscow had achieved a degree of stability, though the outcome remained uncertain. On November 7th, the anniversary of the October Revolution, a military parade was held on Red Square. Many soldiers marched directly from the parade to the front. The event carried immense symbolic importance, demonstrating unwavering resolve to defend the capital. Less than a week later, Army Group Center received orders to renew the offensive. With colder temperatures freezing the ground, tanks could maneuver off-road once more. German frontline divisions were issued winter clothing. Orders from the 4th Panzer Group declared that the waiting period was over and that only Moscow's final defensive line remained to be destroyed. Meanwhile, Soviet defenses had been significantly reinforced. Intelligence permitted the redeployment of divisions from the Far East via the Trans-Siberian Railway under strict secrecy. Even trained commanders were unaware of their destination. Due to mounting losses, German planners abandoned the idea of fully encircling Moscow. Instead, the 3rd and 4th Panzer Groups were concentrated on the left flank near Kalinin and Volokholamsk, aiming to push Soviet forces back to the Lama River, secure crossings of the Volga Reservoir, and advance toward the Moscow-Volga Canal. The November offensive emphasized a direct breakthrough toward Moscow rather than classic encirclement tactics. On November 18th, Guderian's 2nd Panzer Group resumed its offensive northeast of Tula toward Kaluga. However, the chosen axis ran through heavily forested terrain northwest of Moscow, limiting German armored maneuverability. Despite this, the combined force of 2 panzer groups achieved a breakthrough at Volokholamsk after intense fighting. The 3rd Panzer Group advanced north of the Istra Reservoir toward Klin, while elements of the 4th Panzer Group pressed toward Istra. Yet, unlike the October catastrophe, the Soviet front did not collapse. Red Army units conducted organized fighting withdrawals to successive defensive positions along the Istra Reservoir and near Klin. Lieutenant General Konstantin Rokossovsky, commanding the 16th Army, received authorization to withdraw to the Istra River line. However, Zhukov countermanded the order, insisting positions be held at all costs. Ultimately, German forces under Generals Hopner and Reinhardt outflanked the reservoir from the north, capturing Klin and Solnechnogorsk on November 24th, only 50 kilometers from Moscow. This success threatened Rokossovsky's forces with encirclement and opened a potential northern approach to Moscow. By late November, intense fighting continued as German forces pressed forward. Simultaneously, Guderian attempted a wide envelopment of Tula, threatening Kashira. However, Lieutenant General Belov's cavalry corps, fighting dismounted with artillery support, halted the advance. By the end of November, some German commanders could see Moscow through binoculars. Reports suggest that on November 30th, motorcycle units reached Khimki, just 8 kilometers from Moscow's outskirts. Reinhardt's forces reached the Moscow-Volga Canal, while other units captured Krasnaya Polyana, 30 kilometers from central Moscow. In the west, the line had remained largely static since early November. In the south, although Guderian bypassed Tula and reached Kashira's outskirts, his offensive stalled. German forces were exhausted. The conditions were set for a Soviet counteroffensive. Fresh reserve armies began arriving at the front. Localized Soviet counterattacks began on November 27th near Kashira and November 29th north of Moscow. Then, on December 5th, 3 Soviet fronts launched a full-scale counteroffensive. Wehrmacht forces were driven back between 100 and 350 kilometers from Moscow. 3 days after the counteroffensive began, Hitler signed Directive No. 39, ordering a transition to defensive operations across the Eastern Front. The Battle of Moscow marked the first major defeat of the German army in World War II. General Gunther Blumentritt later admitted that this was the turning point of the Eastern Campaign, and that hopes of defeating the Soviet Union in 1941 collapsed at the final moment. At Moscow, the Wehrmacht encountered not only fierce resistance, but also evolving Soviet operational methods, forces capable of mounting coordinated defensive actions and launching precise counterblows against unprepared enemy formations. If you appreciate restored historical footage and stories like this, make sure to subscribe to History Safe. Your support helps keep these rare moments from the past alive and accessible. Don't forget to like the video, leave a comment, and share it with others who love history. Every interaction helps History Safe uncover, restore, and bring more forgotten footage back to life. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more incredible history.